George, if you can sit here. Welcome. Testing. There we go. Welcome, everybody, to this first Big Tent talk of the day. We are talking about transport for net zero. My name's Tristan Cork. I'm a South Bristol reporter for the Bristol Post. In case anyone, no one will know who I was anyway, don't worry about it. So I wanted to introduce everybody first of all. But first of all, I need to talk about Slido, which is a thing by which you can submit questions. So if you've got your phones, you need to go to slido.com and then use the hashtag RBT2022 and then for the 7tent and then type your question and then it should appear, as if by magic, there's a QR code as well up there. It should appear on the screens and we will talk about it because it will come up on my lovely iPad that I've got here. So that's a bit of admin there. And also, I need to talk about if you haven't got a phone, then stick your hand up. We will come to you if we can. But if you can possibly use Slido, that would make it a lot better for everybody. Okay, so I wanted to welcome everybody to this event. On the panel today, we have, on the far right over there as I look, and maybe not in a political sense, we have George Freeman, who is the MP for Mid-Norfolk from 2010. He's the current Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Science, Research and Innovation. Is that right? He was the Minister of State for Transport for a very brief time. Do you know how long it was?
Yep, I'll say that when I'm on my feet.
Okay.
Yep.
I counted 202 days, but you might have a different one. He went to Radley College, which is a private school with its own golf course, and then on to Cambridge. And he's also the founder of the Big Tent of Ideas Festival. So this is his party, so we should be extra nice to him. We've got Vince Cable on my right here. He was an MP of your station there. And from 2010, he was the business secretary in the coalition government and the leader of the Liberal Democrats from 2017 to 2019, a role he passed up in 2007, 10 years earlier, because he feared ageism, according to Wikipedia.
I can't be on Wikipedia yet.
You're not on Wikipedia, don't worry. On my left, we've got Emma Edwards, who is a city councillor here in Bristol. She's lived in Bristol for 39 years. She joined the Green Party in 2015 and became the city councillor for Bishopston and Ashley Down in 2021.
Yeah, last year.
She's a therapist and yoga teacher and also a diversity instructor.
Diversity trainer, yeah.
Diversity trainer. And on the far left, we have an expert. And we're not all tired of experts here. This is Professor Velasquez Ting. She is a research director for the Faculty of Engineering and a net zero champion for the GW4 consortium of universities, which is basically Cardiff and Bristol and Bath. Her own research is into the development and testing of new materials for hydrogen storage, which I think is the future, isn't it? Hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
Right, okay. So, let's crack on. We now know who we all are, and we're going to start by doing the questions on the intro, but if you've got any questions, I will urge you to use the hashtag up there. And also, I have to say as well that a couple of the people on this panel here have books in the bookstore. You'll never guess which two out of our four have books in the bookstore. We have Vince Cable's book, is called The Chinese Conundrum and Money and Power, and Vince will be available after for a bit of signing. And George's book is called Beyond Brexit, and there are copies of that here as well. that. Are you going to sign them, George, or are they already?
Yeah, it's called Britain Beyond Brexit.
Britain Beyond Brexit. The notes were wrong, it doesn't say. Never mind. Right, okay. So let's crack on with the first question. And I'll start with you, George, if that's okay. What is the future for transport in the UK if we are to meet net zero targets?
Thanks. Let's crack on, because we've got 40 minutes to answer the questions. The point of this is that you guys get to have your say. So we're each going to say a few words about thoughts on the answers. I got 3 provocative thoughts to give you. And I should just say in terms of background, I had a 15-year career in technology financing, mainly in bioscience, a bit of clean tech and a bit of agri-tech. And for 12 years in Parliament, I've been trying to make the case that we will never get out of structural deficit and constant boom and bust economics, which Vince and I profoundly agree on, and I served with him in the coalition government backing industrial strategy, unless we invest more seriously and support our science, research and innovation. This country can be home to the technologies, to the products, the services that the world requires to go through the net zero revolution and the agricultural revolution required to feed 9 billion mouths. And we need to stop being a cafe service society that will never get out of structural deficit and generate the growth by backing the businesses of tomorrow. So I was Minister of State for the Future of Transport at DfT. My mission there was to push the 3 Ds, digitalisation, decarbonisation and disconnection. And I would suggest gently to you that the Department for Transport needs to be much more about place and people and less about concrete and big infrastructure for the tier 1 engineering companies. And if we're really going to hit net zero, we have to embrace, yes, the big top-down technology pieces, and I'm proud of what we're doing. We're investing in the big hydrogen infrastructure. We're investing in the big HS2, which I happen to think is a good project. We're investing in the big infrastructure. But the real key to me is that we have to unleash a micro-revolution, microeconomic, community net zero revolution. In my constituency, 115 villages, 5 towns, no one knows what net zero means for us on the ground. They think of it as a London phrase. At COP26, we need to be coming up with a world in which every family can score red, amber, green. Why is our village red, Dad? Why aren't we in the green village? Why is our school not green? And create a framework in which we incentivize and support and encourage, including with financial rewards, those nudge economics of 1 million choices each year from people on the ground in the lived reality. And unless we do that, I think we'll do all the big technology, but we won't actually get to net zero. 3 radical thoughts. Firstly, this does not require a mass nationalisation. I know some on the left think of the net zero project as the final chance to renationalise the economy. I couldn't disagree more. If we're going to get there, it'll be through harnessing the genius of the market and innovation. And what the government needs to do is do the big investment in tomorrow's science and the microeconomics to allow that market force to take shape. Second point, we won't do this unless we really focus on cities. Cities are the places where actually the economies of tomorrow are shaped. Cities are the places where dirty public transport can contribute, makes the biggest contribution to air quality. 300,000 people die unnecessarily from dirty air. Cities are where we'll incubate the systems of tomorrow, and cities are the beating hearts of economic regions. And that's why, as Minister for the Future of Transport, the first place I came to was Bristol, and I came to see Marvin, and he said, that's amazing. You're the first Conservative minister who's ever come to ask me how I'm going to help you achieve your goals, and that's why we're here today. And the third point is, to really do net zero in cities, we're going to have to change, I think, over the next few years, quite profoundly, the fiscal envelope, by which I mean, at the moment, Treasury looks at cities, and they produce a lot of money in council tax, they produce a lot of money in fuel duty, they produce a lot of money in parking revenues. We're going to have to design a digital, new economic model for cities in which we reward people who are driving in electric cars. We start to raise the barriers to people driving in gas guzzlers. We start to do very smart digital road pricing, and we start to make cities digital hubs of net zero, clean, green growth. If we can get that right, the cities of Britain will drive net zero across the whole of the UK.
Thank you, George. Vince Cable.
Yeah, I think there are 2 ways of looking at this whole problem of net zeroing transport. I mean, a bird's eye and a worm's eye view, and I'll try and be a bird and a worm briefly. I mean, the bird's eye picture is that 99% of the sector is using hydrocarbons. There's a little bit of electric vehicles, but it's so far minor. And the alternatives, which are essentially battery-driven cars predominantly, or hydrogen are the two options we need to be thinking about. And this is massive because it's over a quarter of all our national emissions are coming out of the transport sector. I want predominantly to talk about the worm's eye view because I'm director of a company that is so far successfully using hydrogen in part of this market, the heavy goods vehicle market. Essentially what we do is we take green hydrogen from wind farms that have a surplus, private wire companies, or from anaerobic digester plants which convert the methane into hydrogen. And then we take it to the customers who are heavy good vehicle companies, sometimes councils who are doing big refuse vehicles, and we're the intermediaries between the two, the infrastructure, because there's a basic chicken and egg problem, as there often are in new industries. The producers of hydrogen are not going to install their converters until they're satisfied there's a market, and the lorry owners and the lorry makers are not going to convert to hydrogen fuel cells until they're confident that there's a regular supply. And we're the guys in the middle who are trying to establish an infrastructure, and we're doing it in a competitive way. We're not subsidized by the government. We're operating in Scotland, Teesside, and spreading around the country, trying to build up a network of refueling stations, growing very rapidly. Next year, we will be listing on the capital markets to raise capital to create a national network, all being well. So this is an example of essentially business seeing an opportunity within the zero carbon economy, taking the slogans about hydrogen and actually translating them into a business proposition and making a success of it. Since the minister's here, just two requests to him. One, there is a regulatory issue. Hydrogen combustion engines are not classified as zero carbon because of an expectation that there are kind of NOx emissions, and you can deal with that with an additive called AdBlue, which I understand from George is made in Ukraine, and if that regulation could be changed, that would give a whole new opening to hydrogen. And the second is public education. Some people are afraid of hydrogen. They've read a book about the blowing up of the Hindenburg almost a century ago, and they think it's dangerous. Well, of course, like a lot of other things, it's potentially dangerous, but there are now very strong and very clear safety regulations. There are new materials like Kevlar for lining the tanks, and certainly the people in the industry we're working with, this is sort of 100% safe fuel, but people have their apprehensions, and we need government to help in disseminating any myths that this is some dangerous alternative. But if we can do those things, a whole new market is opening up. Heavy goods vehicles, buses on long trips, not necessarily around cities, maybe even like vans that have to do a lot of transport. A massive industry, which if it takes off successfully, would clear away a lot of the hydrocarbons coming out of this sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vince. Can I move across to Councillor Emma Edwards, please?
Thank you very much. Okay, so in 2018, Bristol was one of the first cities in Europe to declare a climate emergency, and it's 4 years later, and we're still in an emergency. If anything, it's got worse. So the IPCC report this year came out and said, we are no longer trying to stop climate change from happening. We are now trying to mitigate its effects. And as a councillor and as a resident, I don't see that happening in Bristol yet. And we've really got to get a crack on, basically. And this has got to take a carrot and stick approach. I love hearing about all green technologies and what's going on in the academic sector and in the business sector. But that doesn't help us right now. We've got to think about what we can do for people in Bristol, in every city, at the moment. And there are solutions there. So the carrot and stick approach, we need to get this revenue. So things like workplace parking levies, the clean air zone, congestion charges, parking charges. We've got to make driving the less attractive option, while at the same time creating a modal shift so that people want to use public transport, people want to cycle and walk. We've got illegal levels of pollution in Bristol still, even though everybody here thinks it's a green city, they're environmental, they want to make really good choices. And as a councillor, my job is representing the worms, basically. So, you know, speaking to people on the doorstep, and people want to cycle, you know, they want to walk, they want to take their kids to school, but they don't feel safe. They don't feel safe cycling in the city yet. So we need to really, really invest in active travel. We need to invest in public transport, and I do think that it involves getting the public transport back under public ownership eventually. So this workplace parking levy, I think, is a real key aspect to this. So the workplace parking levy, what that would do would put that cost onto businesses, larger businesses, that would charge companies to have more than 12 car parking spaces. So it would put that onus on them to make that change and encourage people to cycle more and to take public transport. And then we could invest that money in mass transit and future technologies. So to give you an example, Nottingham introduced a workplace parking levy in 2012, and they invested that in a tram system. If we had done the same thing here in Bristol in 2012, we would have raised £100 million so far to invest in public transport. So this is what I think we need to be getting on with right now. And we also need to be looking at this modal shift in terms of how the city itself is designed. So the city is growing, we are regenerating, we are planning all the time. And there's this concept that is coming into light around the world of the 15-minute city. And this isn't a new thing. This is something that they were thinking about in the 60s when they were building new towns. And it's a really simple concept, which is you can get everything you need essential for life, so your essential foods and goods, services, within a 15-minute walk of your house. You can access the rest of your city within 15 minutes on public transport or through active travel. And so I would really like to see that principle applied to all of our planning in Bristol to make the city more livable, to make it more green, and to make it an easier place to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emma. And finally, Professor Velasquez.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So I was really happy to hear all of the rest of the speakers talking about the potential for new solutions to decarbonize transport, because my big message here is that, so I do research at the University of Bristol, and seeing that we have cutting-edge technologies and really intelligent people who are working in academia and industry to come up with technological solutions to decarbonize transport and the way that we move around and we live. The message that I want to get out there is that there are solutions, and now it's a matter of getting on and adopting them. So I'm very proud to be in Bristol in the southwest, because we're lucky that we have a fantastic ecosystem of industry who are willing to work with us. A lot of companies working in aerospace, working in manufacturing, working in industries where we need them on board to be able to adopt green technologies like electrification, like hydrogen. And I guess my personal view is that hydrogen is going to play a big part in being able to balance the blowing. But it's not the only solution. We have to adopt a variety of different solutions. So in some instances, electrification is absolutely the best way to go. For some types of transport, it's not appropriate. It's too heavy. There isn't the energy density. You might not have the infrastructure for electrification. And so having a mix of different technological solutions that we are willing to adopt where it's appropriate, and being flexible about how we do that, I think that's an important message to take away. Another thing that I want to stress is that it is a multifaceted problem. And so when we're thinking about decarbonization, we have the technology side, we need industry on board, but we also need public acceptance. So when Vince was talking about the preconceptions with the flammability and the safety aspects of hydrogen, for example, one of my favorite examples to counter this is the research that's been done, for example, at the University of Ulster, or you can see examples on YouTube where they've taken hydrogen cars and run them into walls, or shot them with machine guns, and to test how safe they are, because there are a lot of safety developments that are put on board to make these technologies usable and safe. But those messages have to get out into the public consciousness. And it's something that I would love if the awareness of how much work is going into making these technologies easy and safe to use. If that message could get out there, then that would be fantastic. So finally, just I guess just a plea to, because if we are going to decarbonize transport, it's a huge issue, and there's massive urgency to do this quickly. And so one of the things that we need to be aware of is that we need to make it easy for people to be able to decarbonize the way that they use transport. So things like making it as economically competitive as we can, but also in cases where we want to encourage active alternatives to fossil fuel transport. Like we just need to make the choice available and easy and acceptable, and then we'll be able to push everyone towards making the right choices so that we can decarbonize transport. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for all the people who've already submitted questions. You can keep doing that, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. I just wanted to wake you all up by just literally doing a quick straw poll. How many people here own a car? And on the panel, please. Okay, everyone except me. That's great. How many people here rely on public transport to get to work? How many? Keep your hands up if you live in London. Okay. Right. So you're all awake now. Good. So we know who would, what kind of conversation we're having. Who's here? So the first question is anonymous. Does the common citizen understand the concept of a carbon footprint? Emma, do you think that? Do you think they do?
I think the common citizen, average citizen, I think they know about, well, there's the abstract and then there's the lived experience. So they might have heard of carbon, through being consumers. We hear, where was it the other day when we bought some carbon neutral falafel, and I thought that was hilarious because what does that mean? What's carbon neutral falafel? It sounds very Bristol, I know that much, but it has become a little bit of a buzzword, like carbon neutral or carbon footprint. So I think it's when people apply that to their lived experience. So people know when the traffic's bad. People know when the air is heavy with pollution. People know when their streets are covered in absolute muck, or the drains have flooded. So I think the difference between lived experience and what people are sort of told are two very, very, very different things. And if things become inaccessible just because they're carbon neutral, people won't get on board with that. It's got to have real, tangible effects for people's lives. It can't just be this abstract, oh, we're going to save the planet, because people think small because that is their lives, I think. Thank you.
George, do you think people, the ordinary man on the Clapham omnibus,
or woman,
understands the concept of a car, their own carbon footprint?
No, I think they understand the concept of carbon footprint. I think they're hungry to know what theirs is. They'd like some mechanism I'd like to look at my phone and go, it tells me how many steps I've done each day. I just think we should have a sort of green city mapper, and it'll tell me exactly which choices I'm making, which ones are red and green, and you can start to nudge in the right direction. But the key point is most common citizens are facing a massive cost of living crisis, and I think they fear that this is going to be done as a big government tax punishment, we need to use the opportunity of a huge energy price spike. This is the moment to really show that green technologies, green solutions, walking, cycling, public transport, save you money. And I think this is a moment where we can really show with microfinance and very small fiscal nudge that this is how you reduce your household bills.
You say that though, and I'll just point out, I go with good energy, 100% renewable, and my energy bills have gone up just as much as everyone else's because the wholesale price of electricity is bought in that way, it's bought and sold in that way.
That's why I made the point I did about market reform. I mean, Vince is the market economist, he's the expert on this, but I think the market can deliver this for us. What we should be focusing on is how we incentivize, but which is all about metrics. It's about showing which railway companies are the cleanest, which public transport companies are the cleanest, and then people will start to choose the ones that are cleanest. That will drive real change.
Kind of like calorie counters on a restaurant menu.
Well, I think it'll be much more consumer friendly than that, because I think most people want to reduce their carbon footprint. They don't know how, and they don't want to be told, basically go backwards.
Yeah.
They want to know how they can carry on developing their life in a way that supports the green agenda.
Okay. There's a question here from an anonymous person. Does the government have confidence in its legislation for emissions and pollutions to the environment? Vince, do you think they do?
Well, I'm not in the government anymore, but I think that there's quite a lot of the energy has gone out of the zero carbon objectives. I mean, the positive and the negative. I mean, the positive is that unlike America, we're not sort of divided fundamentally on green issues and zero carbon. There is a sort of consensus, and the Prime Minister, whatever you think about him, bought into the COP summit and the objectives of it. So, there is that basic understanding that we all share. We're not unlike Americans, half of us saying this is a load of crap and it's nothing to do with us. The negatives is that follow through is very, very difficult. I think it goes back to your first question. I think we all agree in abstract that going on a flight to Australia consumes a lot of carbon, going around on a bike doesn't. But when it comes to actually using your tax system, say, to penalise flights or long-distance flights or frequent flights, or applying some kind of pricing system in cities which favours public transport over heavy using vehicles, then people start to revolt. Monsieur Macron discovered the hard way that when you introduce a carbon tax and some people pay more than others, they get angry. And we haven't got to the stage where governments either have the confidence or the persuasive ability to turn good intentions into tough policy. Okay, thank you. We've got about 3 questions on the cost of train travel, so thank you for all of those people who've sent in those. A major problem in the UK, I think, is the cost of train travel, especially compared to flying. How can we sort this out urgently? And then someone's put, do you think one of the biggest opposers to lowering transport emissions is unaffordable train fares? How many people here came by train? How much did it cost? 15 quid? That's not bad.
Depends where you came from.
From where, though?
Yeah. From Taunton, okay. London to Bristol is heaven knows what now. I would never do it. About 80 quid, I think. 80 quid. So, cost of train travel. Emma, do you think that's the biggest thing people should be tackling?
It's up there, yeah, definitely. And I would bring the trains back into public ownership, I'm afraid, George. Eventually, that's what I think we need to do. And we need to look at electrification of trains. And we can't keep asking people to fly less, drive less, but then not give them cheaper and better alternatives. At the moment, I went to Manchester this weekend gone, and it took me, the trains were cancelled, so I missed connections. It cost me 65 quid there, 65 quid back. If I'd have driven, it would have been, I have a very fuel efficient car, it would cost me about 40 quid in petrol, less than. that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be the case. Taking the train should always be the cheaper, better option. People shouldn't have to worry about it. Even getting around Europe. I mean, you go to Europe and the trains are just so much better. And why can't we learn from them and improve them?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, just one thing, sorry. I think one thing we tend to lose sight of is that relatively few British people rely on trains, mainly people in big cities, London commuting. The public transport that really matters for the vast majority of people, particularly people on low incomes, is buses.
Yeah.
Rural areas and indeed deprived communities, left behind areas in small towns around the country. The bus services have been quietly slashed for a long period of time. It's very difficult to operate bus companies in a satisfactory way. I happen to sit on the board of a social enterprise bus company that runs buses in Bristol, amongst other places. And it's, you know, the business is being destroyed because you've got rising fuel, rising wage costs, prices are fixed, so you lose money. So unless you're a very, very ruthless operator, it's very difficult, or heavily subsidized, it's very difficult to make bus businesses work. But if we're serious, a lot of money and support's got to go into bus services.
Velasquez, do you think trains are the future, trains are the answer?
Well, trains and buses, yeah, but as long as they move away from fossil fuels. So this is like I love the idea of converting to something like hydrogen, because it is something that we can generate locally. So that in the southwest we've got hydrogen from solar, from wind. You can make it as a cogeneration byproduct from nuclear power, for example. But like the thing is, it's taking essentially electricity that we can't store because we don't have huge battery grids and that we would otherwise jettison, turning it into something that we can physically put into a tank and save for later, and using it for a transport fuel. So I think that if we invest in things like the hydrogen buses, and there are hydrogen trains as well in France and Japan, like looking at ways that we can locally generate and control the prices of alternative fuels like hydrogen. I think that's going to feed into a longer term solution, which would mean that we're not coupled to fuel prices overseas, for example, and then we can start to lower the cost of public transport that way.
Okay, George.
Yeah, so look, if we're going to get net zero transport, we're going to have to deal with the micro, the medium and the macro scale. So locally in cities, we need much more cycling, much more walking, and not least because it's healthy for us. That's how we'll also avoid being obese and having the cardiovascular and metabolic disease time bomb. So then a little bigger geography, it's buses. And then for inter-country travel, clearly rail has got a much bigger role to play. But I do think, just on buses, second point, successive governments for 50 years have treated the buses like a sort of shabby, dirty, very low aspiration, sort of benefits claimant sort of communication, sort of mobile system that is heavily subsidised, grotty old diesel buses. I mean, in my county of Norfolk, huge reliance from villages on buses, and they've been gradually downgraded and downgraded and downgraded. They're not interested in customers, they're interested in the subsidy. They don't mind running an empty old diesel bus up and down. They get a grant from the county council. It's hopeless. So I am quite proud that we have really started to invest and shake up the bus system. I wouldn't nationalise it. I would use fiscal incentives to say to cities and towns, if you can reduce your carbon footprint, we'll give you money. And guess what? I'd probably go and start a bus company, because that's the way that you get people out of cars. People want to do it. And one of the things we're doing is bus responsive digital services. So people in Norfolk, we've got a pilot in Norfolk. You log on the night before, 6 o'clock, and say, I want to go from Swaffham to Norwich sometime between 10 and 11 tomorrow. A lot of people, there are peaks and troughs, and then you run off the back of a computer that takes a nanosecond to go, there are 400 people who need to get from Swaffham to Norwich in the morning. We'll have 5 buses come between. It's not difficult, this stuff. But if we just run it as a subsidy to operators on a very marginal, that's all we're going to get. So we need to. And on rail, I just deeply disagree that going back to British Rail is the way to create this revolution of net zero, green, empowered citizen transport. There is a huge problem. So I think the train services are run much better. They're actually run much better. But I think we should be subsidising them more. And I think the subsidies should be linked to their embracing of green technologies. I'd like to score all the railway companies on how green they are in terms of metrics, the science of their supply chain, and start to reward them for going greener. That's the way you'd harness the market. And thirdly, I would create regional railway companies. It's been a campaign for 10 years. You could do one in East Anglia in the southwest easily. I'd give them a 20-year franchise. I'd let them reintegrate track and train. I'd give them compulsory purchase powers to buy up the land around the stations, create little 5G business hubs and own the property, and I'd let the season ticket holders have a share in it. I'd harness people's aspiration for green transport in enlightened corporate ventures that are ambitious. If you go back to British Rail, I think you'll end up going backwards. You will not have a progressive, advanced, green, smart, consumer-facing service.
Are train tickets too expensive, though?
Yeah.
They are. I just Googled how you vote. You consistently voted against slowing the rise in rail fares.
No, what you're doing is reading Labour Party propaganda.
No, this is on a...
No, I'll tell you what you're doing.
No, this is on a website that says how you voted.
Yes. So what happens in Parliament, it's pretty dysfunctional, that's why I set up the big tent, is that you play party politics, and so opposition day debates, they come up with motions like, this House believes in motherhood, apple pie, and a cutting and slashing of all rail fares quickly. And the government goes, we can't do that, so we vote against it. And then opposition parties produce a leaflet saying, did you know he voted to... It's just not a mature debate. I mean, if you want to play that game, we could sit here and talk about who voted for what. If we really want to tackle the solutions, we need to have a debate about how we liberate cities like Bristol to really drive leadership in green technologies.
Okay. Nick Strugdle, thank you for your question. I take issue with the genius of the market quote. The market is a proven idiot. Just look at the state of the planet. What different approaches would you consider? We've just heard a really interesting idea about the regional rail things. That's a fascinating concept. Vince, what other different approaches would you consider other than is the market going to be able to make us go to net zero?
Well, of course it isn't.
It isn't.
But it's part of the solution. You know, markets combined with municipal, community, national investment. I mean, you've got to have a combination of the two. I mean, I've just, written this book about China, which is run by the Communist Party. But actually, a large part of its economy runs on market principles. But where you need to have the state intervenes. And until the present guy, it was all done in a very non-ideological, practical way. And they've now realized, pollution is a problem, massive problem. So you need state intervention, you need taxes, subsidies, whatever, to deal with that. So, markets are not the solution. They're part of the solution, together with public involvement. And just as following up what George said a few minutes ago, the whole debate is so ideologically silly in a way. I mean, few people, I suspect, in this audience are aware that we already have a nationalised rail infrastructure. I mean, it's happened by accident. George Osborne nationalised the rail system one night quietly. He didn't want to own up to it, so he kept quiet about it. The Labour Party didn't want to give the government credit for having nationalised it, so it kept quiet about it. So very few people realised that Network Rail moved from being a private enterprise to being a nationalised enterprise. But, it was a sensible, pragmatic thing to do at the time. But the trouble is, we use this jargon about, the evils of markets or the wonders of markets in a very ideological way. In the real world, you need a combination of things.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Before I move on, the gentleman here just wants to, if you can make it a question.
Yeah, absolutely. I live so far on the east-west of Superman, which is 20 miles down the A370, where a huge number of commuters come from. If the parking right into Bristol, you are legally kind of obliged to park there and get on a bus. It should be a transport interchange. You can get on a bike. And if people who commute up there, because you can automatic number recognition, you can identify all the people commuting and then invite them and say, well, if we ran buses every 10 minutes, consider modal shift and also had secure cycle parking at the end, so people could possibly cycle a couple of miles to a modal point and then get on the bus. Because if buses are much more frequent, we're likely to use them, and we can have greener buses and less
Okay, thank you. This your point there moves on to segs nicely into the couple of questions we've had here, moving this on about active transport. Shouldn't George Ferguson is here, or maybe he submitted this question. Hi, George. Shouldn't we put more emphasis on rewarding people who walk, cycle, or bus than rewarding those who drive for driving electrical hydrogen vehicles, which aren't net zero? Emma Edwards, what do you? And then there's another question. Sorry to. There's another question about. I can't find it now. Yeah. So walking and cycling. Shouldn't we be concentrating on that?
I think yes. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be suitable for everybody. There's always going to be people who, due to disability or age or whatever, can't use active travel, and that's why we clear the roads and we have the public transport as well. I really like what you said. You hit on one of my things that I'm very excited about, which is this idea of multi-transport hubs. It's like to get from one place to another, you can get on a bus or a train, and then you can get off and you can rent a bike. You don't have to take your bike across the country, because when you get there, you can rent a bike. I went to Berlin earlier this year, and it was just so easy. There was just rental bikes everywhere. There was rental e-scooters everywhere. We've got e-scooters here in Bristol. I know they're a bit controversial. And we've just got some new rental e-bikes, but there's about 20 of them for the whole city. We need loads of them. And I think how we reward people is by making it safe. There's a principle in Europe which is a cycle lane isn't a cycle lane unless you can cycle on it from age 8 to 80. It's got to be that safe. Kids have got to be able to cycle on it. Nervous, brand new cyclists have got to be able to cycle. I love cycling, and I am not a very good cyclist. I'm not a kind of racing bike down. I like kind of person. I've got my little town bike, and I get really nervous cycling in Bristol because the cycling infrastructure is so dangerous in so many places. We have not got good cycling infrastructure in the city yet, and we really need to focus on that. And also storage. So this is something at the moment, and I know there is this $500,000 that's been granted to look at a plan of cycle hangars. I think it should actually go towards cycle hangars. But in Bristol, we have a lot of people live in Victorian terraced houses. They would love to buy an e-cargo bike, but they haven't got anywhere to store it. It's ironically safer to have a car against being stolen than it is to have an e-cargo bike. That's not how it should be. We should provide bike storage for people so that we can encourage them into active travel.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you. Can I just go to Velasquez? George's question, I'll read it again. Shouldn't we put more emphasis on rewarding people who walk, cycle or bus than rewarding those for driving electric cars or hydrogen vehicles which aren't net zero? Now, you talked about that before. As the expert here, what is, in terms of net zero and hydrogen and electric cars, how does that, why is George saying that?
Well, I can see that there are, it depends for hydrogen cars, for example, it depends where you get the hydrogen from. For electric vehicles, there might be critical elements that you need to create those vehicles. But I think the important point is that these are low or potentially zero carbon alternatives to fossil fuel transportation. And if, for instances where there isn't a good public transport hub, or you're traveling further than you can walk or cycle, or you need to be able to use a train, a car, or a plane. Having those lower carbon alternatives is really important for social equity and for retaining our quality of life as we know it. But can I just mention something that touches on what we were talking about with availability of public transport and the costs. So something we haven't talked about is the use of digital technologies to be able to make those trips more efficient, to make sure that we're not running diesel buses when it's not needed or when there's not demand, and to let communities take public transport decisions and carbon footprint decisions into their own hands by giving them the data and the information to make greener choices. And so I can do with technology and with sharing of information to just nudge people towards lower carbon alternatives.
Okay, thank you.
Tristan, can I just say my point is that we're given the impression that if you buy an electric car, you've done it, and that's fine. Yeah. And there's no problem. And we are given that impression, and there are big subsidies to electric cars. Yeah. I sort of welcome that, but I think that's the wrong impression. If you ditch your car, then that's fine.
Yeah, that's right.
We need to give much more emphasis on that rather than just transferring to another high-embodied energy vehicle.
Yeah, but there is a danger of just letting the best be the enemy of the good.
Yeah, yes, there is.
I mean, you must avoid. But I think where your question has real force is that the way we're developing our cities is with new housing is very often with peripheral estates. Which require some form of motorised transport, however it is. And we've got to rethink city development to make it much denser, getting people living in a city, in which case the issues of cycling and walking then become valid alternatives.
Let's pick that up. I completely agree with Vince. Net zero requires a big change in planning. We need to plan for active, healthy, integrated communities. And I think you're right. The point I'm trying to make about the fiscal incentives is we have to encourage people to make little steps and then make bigger steps. And in the end, we all work, particularly in the cost of living crisis, on incentives. So we should cascade the incentives. So having a green car is better than having a non-green car. But the footprint of having a car is still a carbon footprint. It has to be made and manufactured. So we need to say on the points system, riding in a bus rather than a car is a huge sight better, and the money should follow. Last point, there is a project in the UK that takes 1 million avoidable car journeys off the road every morning. It's the biggest reduction in emissions every day, and it was started by a company called LiftShare, and they run corporate schemes so that people driving into companies like Boots headquarters in Nottingham, thousands of people every day driving into Nottingham in one person in a car, and with the company, they then give people huge rewards if they car share. LiftShare hasn't had any money from government. It's completely voluntary. It's a market-based mechanism, and it's working with companies. It's far bigger than any government schemes, taking 1 million cars off the road every morning. And that's why I believe in the power of the market, with incentives. Markets operate with values and incentives. We won't do it alone, but I think if we start to put in those fiscal incentives and measure which cities are greener, which companies are greener, which towns are greener, what are the things that change your footprint, people will start to really make choices.
Okay.
Can I make a little point on that?
Crack on, Emma.
I think equity is a really important thing to look at here. And the idea of having a fiscal incentive to have an electric a car is out of the realms of a lot of people's budgets, let alone an electric car. You know, people rely on buses, people rely, the bike is a really equitable way of getting around a city, but at the moment the infrastructure isn't equitable, and that's what we have to look at. Where it's very nice to think about, swapping your car for an electric car or making, a train journey over a bus journey or whatever, taking it right down to every member of society and every sort of economic level, you've got to look at that equity, and that's why I think the way we actually structure our cities has got to be more equitable so that people aren't sort of stuck out in estates far away from the town centre and they can't even afford to get the bus into town. It shouldn't be that way.
Thank you. We are out of time, unfortunately. I'm very sorry for anyone who has not had their question answered. We haven't even talked about e-scooters. It's the way I got to this. Please, can you make e-scooters legal for everybody?
Yes, before I got fired for saying no deal would be a bad outcome, I was pushing for e-scooters to be licensed to have test beds, and I wanted Bristol to be one of them.
Well, we've got a pilot scheme here, and it's so good. I've ditched my car and now just go around on a scooter. Thank you very much indeed to all our panelists here. Thank you very much for all the questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. I just want to do two more plugs for the two members of the panel here who have got books in the bookshop. Vince Cable, who is going to stick around if you want to get your book signed, and George as well, who's got a book here as well. So thank you very much indeed. We're over time. Shocking moderating, and crack on with the rest of your festival.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
you want.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, good afternoon. Is it even yet? No, almost. Good morning, everybody. We are just about 12 o'clock now, so lovely to see you. My name's Jessie Wild, and I am going to be your host, along with Jez Sweetland here, for this session. We're really looking forward to this. This session is in partnership with the Bristol Housing Festival, which Jez will explain a little bit more about in a moment. But I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you so much for joining us. This session is on fixing the housing crisis together. It's a massive, massive issue, isn't it? And we all know that there are all sorts of issues around affordability of housing, around the climate crisis, the ecology. We know that there is a housing crisis. But really, what does that mean? And what does it look like? And how does it actually affect us? How does it affect everybody else? How do we solve that? And what does that look like? And how do we get into that? And I'm hoping that over the next little while, over this few minutes that we've got together, some of these people are going to talk to us about some of the ways we can look at fixing the housing crisis. And indeed, what does it even mean to have a housing crisis? So I'm quite excited to look at our panel and ask some big questions about innovation and creativity and how we can think differently on this. But I'm just going to explain what we're going to do. So I'm going to hand over to Jez in a moment, who's going to do a bit of scene setting. We're going to have sort of 8-9 minutes of scene setting, and if he doesn't shut up in that time, I'll cut him off at the knees and we'll move on. And then I've got my panel of guests here, who I won't introduce now. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, who will give us sort of 2 or 3 minutes of commentary back on Jez's scene setting, and then we'll move to
where we sold it for.
You have I think, got a Slido code for this event, or you should have. So do go to slido.com and you can feed all your questions in there and kind of upvote other people's questions that you think are more important. And then I have that panel of questions in front of me, and I can put them to the panel as I see fit. I'm not promising I'm going to answer all the questions. There is going to be way too many to do within the time that we've got, but I'll do my best to pick and choose some that will help to make this conversation most interesting. Anyway, that's totally enough from me. Thank you so much, and I will hand over to Jez. We'll come to questions.
No, what about those who haven't got a Slido? You can't do Slido. That's excluding those of us who...
Put your hand up. Be all right.
Okay.
Jez, let me hand over to you.
Great. Good morning. Thank you very much for being here. So let me just put my cards on the table. The reason I'm here is because I really believe that there's a challenge around the social justice of how we address that structural deficit of those in our city that we have not yet managed to meet their desperate housing needs in terms of the most vulnerable, those that are not in permanent secure accommodation. So I don't believe until we fix that, we really get to really understand how we can start to then look at the other broader complexities of housing. There's a human urgency to this situation which we need to fix as we understand the environment and ecological challenges too. The Bristol Housing Festival was set up in 2018 as a way to try and work with the local authority, with the industry, in that political context, and engage in the wider public to say, how do we change this narrative on housing? How do we start to build trust back into the process, explaining the complexity or nuance of what we're trying to do? And one of the things we discovered in that as we popped up on the waterfront in 2018, some of you may have been there, we put up seven MMC homes on the waterfront to engage people in this debate. And when I say MMC, for those of you who aren't fascinated about the evolution of housing in our country, I'm talking about modern methods of construction. So MMC is the ability for us to take homes and build them off-site. It's moving our house delivery process from a kind of system that is building in a field with brick and block and moving that system to a facility that is manufactured. The ability to create great standardization to drive delivery of more affordable but also more sustainable housing, controlling that quality assurance element, much as you might see, for example, in the car industry. So we popped up these 7 MMC homes, and then that led us into an opportunity to really partner with the council, and huge credit to the council. They're going first on a lot of this agenda for the UK to say, what might it look like to deliver a whole range of MMC homes into Bristol? And it's great we're joined with Bookstore, who will speak a bit about one of the schemes they're working on at the moment. We then started to work with Innovate UK, which is the national government's R&D arm, to say, what if we could deliver 500 MMC houses using